So I'm really disappointed we don't have music to start today. Yesterday, it was just so awesome the way we started after lunch, didn't you think? You know, with war. What is good for? So come on, stand up. Helena says there's no music, but when I say war, you say, huh! Ready? War! What is it good for? Absolutely nothing! Yeah, yeah. War! What is it good for? Absolutely nothing! All right, sit down. I'm just following in the footsteps of greatness here. And in fact, I feel like that's all I'm doing here today, following in the footsteps of greatness. It's been an amazing 36 hours here. So let's begin first with thanking our organizers, Helena, Rodrigo, Jen, and all of us. And as well as the many sponsors that made this happen. I'm just so honored to be part of that group. And seriously, I was trying to think of how to begin after 36 hours or a day and a half of really brilliant speeches, brilliant people, lots of really inspiring ideas. And I remember a story that I once heard about Albert Einstein's chauffeur. Anybody know the story? So let me see if I can remember it here. So Einstein was on the dinner circuit, the university dinner circuit, and he was kind of tired of giving this speech over and complaining to his chauffeur who was driving him around. And the chauffeur said, "Look, boss, I've heard you give this speech so many times, I think I could give it for you tonight." And Einstein, who always liked a really good joke, said, "Sure, we look a little bit alike, or a lot alike, about the same size." So they swapped coats. Einstein puts on the chauffeur's hat, and he goes to the back of the room, and he sits down. And the chauffeur proceeds to deliver a really incredibly good Einstein speech. And then he even starts to take questions. He starts to answer questions, and he's doing great. Until this one professor in the audience is determined to prove that he is the sharpest knife in the drawer. And he stands up and he asks this really esoteric question about, I don't know, antimatter formation or something. To which the chauffeur, without missing a beat, looks at him and he goes, "Sir, that is such a simple question. I'm going to turn to my chauffeur to answer." And so, I am following the real Einsteins, and I know what his chauffeur felt like now because I am getting to chauffeur you through a couple of ideas that I hope will resonate with you, bring value to your work, and maybe even help to motivate you to do even greater things than you already are, because I truly believe that we are at a historic moment in our field, in peace building. As you heard from Jen's introduction, I've been doing this for quite a while, although I realize I'm still one of the youngest, best-looking guys here. But don't let that fool you. I have been working at this a long time, and in fact, I brought a photo of me working with our radio production team 20 years ago. I've changed a lot in 20 years, so see if you can pick me out. Look tough, right? Okay, that is the Talking Drum Studio, a group of incredible people. It was created by Search for Common Ground, and we've got Search for Common Ground here today, so they are still, these guys were amazing and are amazing. They continue to produce great radio right through the wars, right through the Ebola crisis, and they're still doing it today. So really courageous people. But I digress a bit because back to my real point. And the reasons that I think that this is truly a historic moment for our field. Those reasons are really threefold. First, for the first time since I began doing this work about 20 years ago, I don't have to convince anybody about the power of media and technology for social change, good and bad. That wasn't the case before. But thanks to the Arab Spring, and I hate to say it, thanks to all the other things, all the other wars, and the baggage of ISIS taking over social media and so forth, People get it. This is really important. They get it. The second thing that's changed is the technology itself is freaking awesome. And it is ubiquitous. Meaning it was impossible for me to imagine 20 years ago that we would be able to, no matter where we go, South Sudan, country with 186 miles of paved road, go out and I'll still find cell phones charging everywhere I go. I'll still find, in a country like Afghanistan with roughly 65% illiteracy, there will also be 65% cell phone penetration. That's just incredible. The technology, the way that that cell phone has transformed these things is impossible, frankly, to overstate. And thirdly, the establishment. The establishment is where, and by that I mean governments, international organizations, they're all starting to ask, what did we get for the money we spent and the lives we lost in wars like Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya? There's no question that people are looking for an alternative. And by the way, you know, we've been talking a lot about impact here across the last day and a half. I would suggest to you that the next time a government funder says to you, how are you going to measure the impact on peace of your program? Your $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 project. You should turn around and say, how did you measure the impact of the $8 trillion that was spent fighting those wars in the name of peace? We should all be held to the same standard, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. So, those are three reasons that I believe we have a historic opportunity here. Three conditions that never existed before, and we need to seize the moment. Apropos of yesterday's conversation, that great panel led by Sanjana on power dynamics, I truly believe we have a kind of power in this field right now that we have never had before. And with great power, as one famous commentator said, comes great responsibility. Anybody know who said that?
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, exactly, right.
It's not Spider-Man's voice. It's the last panel of the first issue.
As the man wearing orthotic shoes once said, I stand corrected. So, how do we seize the moment? Let me explain. Over the last day and a half, we've seen so many inspiring peace builders, activists, and change makers in this room who are using technology to further the cause of peace. And many of us in this room and beyond call this today PeaceTech. We use that word now. It's convenient to describe innovations in data, in technology, and in media used to save lives in the conflict zones and the communities where we live and work. And as we all know, we in this room are just some of the tip of the iceberg of the people, thousands of people around this planet who are using these new tools and technologies to tackle age-old drivers of conflict, whether that is inter-ethnic, inter-religious differences, whether it is corruption, resource shortages, and so on. People like Ibrahim from the Iraqi Journalists' Rights Defense Association. We met Ibrahim at a PeaceTech exchange that the PeaceTech Lab hosted in Iraq last year. And with a little help from Tim and Derek, where are you guys? Tim and Derek, who are off to Suleiman in Iraq next in a couple of days to do another one of these. With a little help from those guys, Ibrahim was able to create a crowd map that tracks threats and attacks against journalists who, as you can imagine, are absolutely critical to tackling corruption in that country. And people like Anu. This is an amazing young lady. I don't know if you've heard, I've talked about her story in that magazine piece that was in your bags. Anna was one of 4 incredible young ladies, 13 years old, that I met in December in Mumbai. She comes from the Dharavi slums in India, one of the poorest places on the planet, and she and her friends came to show us the mobile app that they had created to counter gender violence in their community. So it sounded an alarm, it sent a help message to friends, and it located them. So it was simple, but it was effective. And they did this by downloading the free MIT do-it-yourself app maker with the help of a mentor onto their shared laptop. And they created a prototype, and it is in the Google Play Store today. So just an amazing story, and just one of the many, many people that I meet all the time around the world who are using PeaceTech. So violent conflict has always been a crucible for innovation, and we all know the internet actually came out of the Pentagon, for goodness sakes. But this burst of innovation by ordinary people, these are not trained engineers or technologists, these are ordinary people who are, for the most part, tackling violence in their communities with technologies that are readily available to them. This is a new phenomenon. So, we might think that these would be the best of times for conflict prevention and peace building around the world. But as we all know from just reading stories every single day from Syria, from Libya, from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, it most certainly is not the best of times. And one reason for this is because the same simple, unprecedented, amazing truth that is empowering this new generation of peace builders that I've just introduced you to is also empowering the authoritarian regimes, the violent extremists, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and so forth, as we have been discussing here over the last day. And that simple, unprecedented, amazing truth that I'm talking about, as we all know, is that for the first time in human history, anybody with a cell phone, and there are more cell phones on this planet today than there are toothbrushes, anyone with a cell phone or an internet connection can send information, ideas, photos, and money around the world with the push of a button. So the question we have to ask ourselves here is, how do we amplify the potential of PeaceTech to save lives above the potential of these same technologies that are being used by those violent extremists for harm and hatred? How do we increase its impact? We've been talking a lot about this here, and my colleagues and I at the PeaceTech Lab, we talk about it all the time as well. And for more than 5 years, in fact, our colleagues and I at the U.S. Institute of Peace have been asking this question of experts and activists alike in virtually every conflict zone where we work, and their answers are quite wide-ranging and diverse, but they're going to sound familiar to the folks in this room, I'm quite sure. So some of them point us towards the need to break down the silos and get the technologists talking more to the other kinds of conflict experts, the local communities, the culture experts, right? We're talking about complex human dynamics, and you're talking about conflict, and the technologists need to be more plugged in to experts on those complex human dynamics. And also, they point me towards, often they point me to intergenerational issues, right? I don't know if any of you saw the Intel study that came out a couple of years back. They found that, on average, people over 25 ring the doorbell with their forefinger. People under 25 ring the doorbell with their thumb, right? From texting, which the dominant digit is changing. And what this means is that different generations connect with technology in completely different ways. And we have to, in thinking about, obviously, technology solutions for problems of complex human dynamics, we have to build that into the equation. So we need cross-generational as well as cross-discipline collaboration. Others point us to the bias that we tend to have for high tech when we think about smartphone solutions, when in many of the environments where we work, it's partially connected 1G sorts of environments. And we need to be thinking low tech. I can't tell you how many times we hear in our travels and in our work in conflict zones how, well, that is a really great idea, that's a really great, I'm not going to skewer any of the platforms we've been talking about here in the last 24 hours, but that's a phenomenal technology. I only wish it worked here. And finally, others talk to us about the pressing need to really get our arms around this brave new world of big data, better data for the power of early warning mechanisms, early response, that we could be doing a lot better there. So lots of different reasons that we're hearing, but what almost all of them seem to agree on is this, that we need scale. More PeaceTech makers, more users, more often, in more places. Helene, I'm going to embarrass you because I have a quote from you. Helene, our wonderful host, wrote in a piece for the Hague Institute for Global Justice, pilot projects are popular and common in the tech for peace field, great for uncovering new ideas, but most pilots often lack the support to scale up. And this also came out in yesterday's panel that Mark Nelson was managing there, the question of scale. So, by way of example, take Ibrahim's tool, the map that tracked attacks against journalists in Iraq. It's only gotten a handful of entries in a country that ranks 153rd out of 180 countries in the 2014 World Press Freedom Index. And ANU Safety Act only has about 50 downloads at this point in a country that is rife with violence against women. So like so many other PeaceTech initiatives, these are essentially pilot projects. So how do we get this scale that we need so that it's more than 1,000 flowers blooming? So the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. As I'm sure you know, entire books have been written about how companies and industries achieve scale, but none of them, in our knowledge, has ever focused on the unique challenges of working in conflict. So that's what we did. And it led us to a very interesting place. It led us to one of the most successful examples of scale in modern history, namely the US defense industry. And I'm sure there are parallels in other countries, so forgive me if this is US-centric. But that's where it led us. And we learned two really key factors drove the scaling, the achievement of scale in that industry. First, we learned that it went back about 100 years ago when the US government shifted money from government munitions factories into the private sector because more modern warfare required specialized tech know-how. Right? So mechanized warfare, mechanized artillery, it just was, they couldn't keep up in government with the specialized technologies. And second, we learned how the government continued to invest in private sector defense contractors, even after major wars would end, because it put a lot of people to work. It was essentially a jobs program for middle America. So just think about this for a second. The two key factors, the two key conditions that gave rise to the defense industry achieving scale, a need for tech know-how and jobs, both of those are very much present today on a global scale. Only now, as I indicated earlier, our most senior military and political leaders are calling for a new approach that is beyond the guns and steel of the military, to quote former Secretary of Defense Gates. And I've heard this from numerous military and political leaders. He is not alone by any means. So let me suggest today that this new approach and the way to achieve scale for PeaceTech that eventually eclipses that of the violent extremists using these same technologies for harm is to start consciously, determinedly, and collectively to build a new industry. A PeaceTech industry. An industry that specializes in the design, the development, and the deployment of the kinds of innovative tools to prevent violence that we have seen here across the last 36 hours. Early warning devices, messaging tools, crowd mapping, gaming platforms, drones for peace. The list is extensive, and I'm sure you all could add lots to that list. And this industry would also create jobs, especially in conflict countries where unemployment among young males who do most of the fighting is staggeringly high. Now, some of the investment for this industry would come from government the way we saw it happen 100 years ago. But only some of the investment. The rest needs to come from a shift in our collective thinking as peace builders. For too long, we have relied on governments and international organizations to fund almost all conflict prevention and peace building work, because for too long, that was essentially the only money around, right? Conflict countries were equated with economic wastelands. But those were yesterday's realities. Today, thanks to that same simple, unprecedented, amazing truth that I mentioned earlier, that anyone with a connection can send information and money around the world with the push of a button, thanks to that same truth, conflict zone commerce and communications are, as we all know, being transformed. I have talked to many of you who also, in your travels, see the changes. Cell phones charging, computers running, airtime selling, despite the violence. We see it in the innovation hubs and hacker spaces that are popping up in almost every conflict country capital, from Bogota to Baghdad. I don't know whether you're familiar, the Baghdad hackerspace was funded by an international Kickstarter campaign. $35,000 those guys raised online for the Baghdad hackerspace. And we see it in announcements by companies, doesn't get a lot of play, but companies like Marriott announced recently, I don't know if you saw this, their next 2 flagship hotels are going to be built in Haiti and Rwanda. They're sort of post-conflict countries, but only a little while ago, these were no-go zones for investment. Now they're emerging markets. And by the way, we see this kind of impressions that we get in our work validated by the data. The data from the World Bank shows a massive expansion in foreign direct investment to war-torn countries across the last decade, especially when compared to kind of the foreign direct investment in the high-income and middle-income countries. So let's take a page out of the history book of the defense industry, and let's use government money to kickstart a PeaceTech industry. But then let's not rely on government money to sustain it. Instead, let's use this power of data, technology, and media to both save lives and build businesses. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So data, right? Conflict zones used to be data deserts. And now, as we all know, these are data blizzards. We just see it from the YouTube videos that get uploaded online. We know what's happening in conflict zones before the military has a clue of what's happening in conflict zones today. Data is the currency of the realm for early warning and anticipating conflict for the work that we do every single day. That same data, needless to say, has monetary value to the companies that are also working there who need to protect their supply chains. And I'm not just talking about the extractive industries, I'm talking about the computer companies who also need access to the minerals that it gets out of the ground to build chips and so forth. So that's a data business. Technology. We've been designing in this field really interesting, innovative tech solutions for a while. That's the Libreo tablet that was designed by the Guardian Project. Anybody seen this thing? One person. And the reason why only one person has seen this thing is because it's not widely available out there, even though it was designed by the Guardian Project to enable activists to access the internet anonymously, those who are living in authoritarian regimes. Phenomenally innovative technology that should be available in retail stores today, given our collective concerns about online privacy. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be, because it's other than sort of collusion between infrastructure folks, infrastructure companies, and software companies. And lastly, media. For a long time, international governments have been starting peace-building media programs like our Salam Shabab series for youth in Iraq, very popular. And they've been doing this for decades. We've got somebody here who was talking to me about the series that aired here in Cyprus years ago, and we Search for Common Ground has done many, many pioneering media series with government money. But what tends to happen is that just when those media series are starting to get both the audience share and the attitude change that the focus groups are looking for, government priorities shift. I know, I've been on the receiving end of this way too many times, and your funding is cut. And because you get the order, go to the other side of the boat. But now, the funding has to go to another country. It's no longer this country. And it's just at the time when we're starting to actually have the most impact. So why not be using media strategies similar to those used by other mission-driven media companies, like Sesame Workshops, National Geographic, and others, that leverage corporate underwriting and marketing in order to sustain their work. I could list lots of examples, but I hope you see my point. Namely that these three business lines alone, tech, data, and media, and I'm sure you can think of others, they have numerous products, services, and customers. We just haven't thought about them this way before. Of course, I'm not naive in making this shift in our thinking. We also have to make sure we're not just substituting, the tyranny of government funding for the tyranny of commercial interests. If data coming from conflict zones is a product, we have to ensure that it isn't used in ways that harm activists or compromise vulnerable populations and privacy. But when I look around this room and meet all of the folks that I've met here for the last day, I see the very people who need to not only be building PeaceTech, but who also need to be building the rules and the institutions that will ensure we create an industry that stays true to the principles that found it. And as we make this shift in our own thinking, we need to become really noisy champions for the changes that also have to happen in the thinking in government and in the private sector. Here's one of those changes. Using data, again, from the US government, but I think you'll find similar imbalances elsewhere in the world. So, today in the US, or this was actually fiscal year 15, so we spend, our budget for defense was $500 billion. The entire budget for diplomacy and development combined was $46 billion. And wait, don't forget the United States Institute of Peace budget. This is the U.S. Center for Conflict Prevention and Peace Building, where I've had the fortune of working. $35 million. And just to put all that into a bit of perspective for you, a 2008 This is 2008 estimate of Google's catering budget. Because I couldn't find more recent statistics, it's obviously a closely guarded company secret. The 2008 budget for Google's catering was $72 million. God knows what it is today. Folks, we can do better. We have to do better. Our leaders and our populations, our citizens, have repeatedly reaffirmed our commitment to a vision of a planet without wars. When they build institutions like USIP, like the United Nations, or recently, the European Institute of Peace. But as my friends in the military are always reminding me, a vision without resources is a mirage. So, I want to be clear. I'm not just talking about a shift in the amounts governments and private sectors spend on peace building. I wouldn't mind $1 billion or $2 billion. But also, I'm talking about a shift in the way it spends those amounts. We need new mechanisms to enable government to devote more funds to being a strategic investor in PeaceTech startups. Similarly, we need the private sector to become bolder in their investments in peace building, going beyond corporate social responsibility investing to follow the lead of the Affinis Group, started by a Silicon Valley entrepreneur that recently announced in February the creation of the first private equity fund for startups developing technologies to counter violent extremism. So put up your hands, guys. Affinis Labs, if you're looking for money. It's the real deal. Now, after working the better part of 2 decades in conflict countries, I don't expect us to be able to stop the tanks, the guns, the megalomaniacs, the beheadings with more blogs, more tweets, more social media, or more cell phones for that matter. Any more, by the way, than I expect us to be able to build cultures of peace and nonviolence in these countries with more airstrikes, more drone strikes, or more boots on the ground. But to build a less violent planet, we need a modern-day strategy for a modern-day world of ubiquitous global communications and capital flows and increasing demands on government. The PeaceTech industry should be a key part of that strategy, designed to take advantage of that simple, unprecedented, amazing truth that, honestly, the world and our field has not fully come to grips with yet, but which means that every one of us has the power of PeaceTech to save lives. Now, I know I've thrown a lot of ideas at you, but as you mull them over, I want to leave you with one more story. I did this, I put down this idea of the PeaceTech industry out in New York, and afterwards, a former diplomat came up to me, and he told me this story. He was a diplomat for the UN in East Timor shortly after that war. And he said to me, I had a budget that was honestly larger than the budget of the entire country at that time. And I was not making any progress on anything, except for this. Every month, after I arrived, I gave my $500 rent check to my boss, to my landlord. The first month I gave him my $500 rent check. The guy took the rent check and dragged into the compound, or into the property there, an old carcass of a bus. The second month, I gave him my $500 rent check, and he dragged into the same property an old burnt-out engine. Started to work and refurbish the engine. And the third month, I gave him my $500 rent check, and he dragged in another bus part and refurbished that bus part, and so on and so on and so on. He said, as I was driving out, as I was leaving East Timor, after 3 years there, I lamented the fact that I didn't achieve jack. I didn't get anything done in my official role in there, as far as I was concerned, except one thing. I managed to start the largest bus company in East Timor. And that guy employs thousands of people, and he carries thousands of people to work every day. So he came up to me afterwards and he said, let me encourage you to really, really run hard at this idea of the PeaceTech industry. So when you leave here, what can we do? What does this mean we can do? It means that individually we can download a PeaceTech app, we can contribute to a PeaceTech crowdfund, or you guys can start the PeaceTech businesses that you are effectively starting. But think about them as a business. And collectively, we need to get serious about pushing both the government and the private sector to commit funds and know-how to developing, mentoring, growing PeaceTech entrepreneurs. Put it on the agenda of the next Build Peace Conference. Put it on the agenda of Davos next year. And by the way, interestingly enough, as I was coming over here, I heard that Davos is putting on the agenda for next year how to expand more responsible corporate investment in conflict countries, recognizing that there is a brave new world of investment going on in these places. So, at the start of this conference, Helena, I remember her saying, be gentle with each other, but so we can be dangerous together. I love that. It just got me so energized. Although, I will say, it was pretty scary language coming from the peace building community. Get dangerous with each other, since this community is almost by definition conflict averse. But, you know, to my surprise and delight, she was echoing a recent talk that I had heard by Kailash Satyarthi from India, the guy who just won the Nobel Peace Prize with Malala. And he was talking about how we spend our whole lives trying to control our anger. Our parents teach us to do that. And yet, sometimes anger is exactly what we need to confront social injustices and to make social change. So, as I said at the very beginning of my talk, I believe we have leverage with government and private sector actors that we never had, thanks to, in part, to the changing flows of information and capital, thanks in part to the failures of traditional government and military action. So let's use that leverage, let's seize this moment, let's build a PeaceTech industry, and thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to it.